At a tea family dinner, Dad asked if the money helped. I said, "What money?" He froze. I turned to Tea Mom. She couldn't even act. Without a word, she diverted the truth away. Picture this. You're at a cozy family dinner, passing the gravy, when your dad casually asks, "Steph, has the money helped with your situation?" The table goes dead silent, and suddenly, my mom's face drains of color, because what money? What the hell was going on? That moment at my parents' dinner table was like a bomb dropping, shattering everything I thought I knew about my family. To understand why it hit so hard, you need a little backstory. My name is Stephanie. I'm 28, and 6 years ago, I practically fled my hometown of Burlington, Vermont, after college, desperate to make it on my own in Boston. I'm a finance professional, or at least, I was until 3 months ago. My relationship with my parents, especially my mom, Karen, has always been a bit strained. We love each other, no doubt, but there was always this unspoken tension. She wanted me to stay close, while I was hell-bent on proving I could succeed without their help. My dad, Thomas, built his construction company from nothing. He was always this proud, practical, straightforward man. Or so I thought. Mom was the classic homemaker, volunteering, keeping everything running smoothly. They seemed like the perfect team, but even as a kid, I picked up on these weird, quiet moments of tension I couldn't quite decipher. Fast forward 6 months ago, my meticulously built independent life started to crumble. My investment firm underwent a massive restructuring, and despite stellar performance reviews, I was laid off. 30% of our department gone. The timing couldn't have been worse. I just signed a lease on a more expensive apartment and financed a new, modest car. And here's where pride becomes a dangerous thing. Instead of being honest, I pretended everything was fine during our weekly calls. I refused to be the failure crawling back home. I told them I was transitioning to a new opportunity, while in reality, my savings were vanishing at an alarming rate. I had to make drastic cuts. First, I sublet my beautiful downtown apartment and moved into a tiny studio in a questionable neighborhood. The windows rattled with every passing truck, and my upstairs neighbors sounded like they were practicing river dancing at midnight. I sold my barely driven car and started taking the bus. Designer work clothes went to consignment shops. Meals became a depressing parade of ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. What no one knew was that I was also dealing with some health issues. Nothing life-threatening, but the stress triggered debilitating migraines that sometimes pinned me to my bed for days. Without insurance, the medication was expensive, but I couldn't function during job interviews without it. It was a vicious cycle. My parents' home, where that fateful dinner took place, is this beautiful colonial with a wraparound porch. Walking in always felt like stepping back in time. The same family photos on the staircase, the same comforting smell of Mom's apple cinnamon candles. It was the kind of stability I both craved and fiercely rejected. My older brother, Jason, 2 years my senior, arrived with his wife, Megan, just before me. They live about 45 minutes away and have the picture-perfect life. Good jobs, a cute house, and they're expecting their first child. Jason works for Dad's company, the path I was expected to follow but flat out refused. There's always been this unspoken competition between us, fueled by what I saw as my parents' favoritism toward him. After all, he stayed close, joined the family business, married his high school sweetheart. I was the rebel. During our greetings in the foyer, I noticed something odd. Jason couldn't quite meet my eyes, and Megan was being overly nice, asking about my apartment and job with unusual interest. At the time, I chalked it up to pregnancy hormones, making her more emotional. But looking back, the signs were all there. The Wilson family has always excelled at keeping secrets. It's our toxic superpower, wrapped in the guise of protecting each other. We don't discuss problems until they become catastrophes. We dodge difficult conversations with practiced ease. We pretend everything is fine when it's clearly not. It's a dance we've all perfected, stepping around landmines of truth with choreographed precision. Little did I know, that night, our carefully constructed facades would finally come crashing down. I arrived at my parents' house at the mandatory 6:30 p.m. for our monthly family dinners, a tradition Mom insisted on after I moved to Boston. The evening air was crisp, typical for early October in Vermont, and the maple trees, lining the driveway, were ablaze with color. "Stephanie, you're right on time," Mom called from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She hugged me tightly, holding on a beat too long. When she pulled back, her eyes scanned my face with unusual intensity. "Have you lost weight?" she asked, her forehead creasing with concern. I forced a laugh. "Just busy with work. You know how quarterly reviews are." The lie slipped out easily. In reality, cheap groceries and stress had indeed made my clothes looser. Dad emerged from his study, greeting me with a standard pat on the shoulder. "There's my city girl. How's that concrete jungle treating you?" "Can't complain," I replied with a practiced smile. "The firm's keeping me busy." As we moved to the living room where Jason and Megan were already settled with drinks, I noticed Mom disappearing into the kitchen with unusual frequency. Each time she returned, her smile seemed more strained. She kept rearranging the appetizer platter, even though nobody was touching it. "So, Steph, how's that fancy office of yours?" Jason asked, swirling his whiskey. "Still have that view of the harbor?" I nodded, taking a large sip of wine. "It's great. Nothing changes." But I hadn't seen that office in months. The company had actually moved locations before the layoffs. Mom suddenly dropped a coaster, flinching at the small noise it made hitting the hardwood floor. "Sorry, just clumsy tonight," she muttered, but her hands were shaking slightly as she picked it up. Dad seemed oblivious, launching into a story about a difficult client at his construction company. But I caught Mom giving him strange, almost warning glances throughout the conversation. Whenever financial topics came up, like the new restaurant Jason and Megan had tried or the rising cost of baby supplies, Mom would quickly change the subject. When we finally moved to the dining room, the tension was palpable. The table was set with Mom's best china and the good silverware, the ones reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas, not our usual monthly dinners. "What's the occasion?" I asked, gesturing to the fancy settings. "No occasion," Mom replied too quickly. "Just felt like using them. They shouldn't sit in the cabinet collecting dust." As we settled into our seats, I noticed Megan giving Jason meaningful looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Dad cleared his throat repeatedly, a nervous habit he's had since I was a child. "So, Stephanie," Dad began, passing the salad, "Jason tells me Boston real estate is getting even. More expensive. Your neighborhood's still treating you well." I nodded, my mouth full of salad, avoiding elaboration. In truth, my new neighborhood had already experienced 2 break-ins on my block alone. "You know, if you ever wanted to come back home for a while, your room is always available," Mom interjected, not meeting my eyes. "I'm fine, Mom." "Really?" I insisted, annoyed at the familiar suggestion. "My career is in Boston." "Of course it is," she said quickly. "I'm just saying, options are good." When the conversation turned to my cousin Eliza's upcoming destination wedding in Hawaii, my stomach tightened. The trip was completely beyond my current budget. Not just the flights and hotel, but the expected gift from the registry where the cheapest item was a $200 serving platter. "I might not make it to the wedding," I admitted reluctantly. "Work is really hectic right now." "But your family," Mom protested. "Eliza would be heartbroken." "I know, but some projects can't be rescheduled." Another lie. "We could help with the flight," Dad offered casually. "Consider it an early Christmas gift." "No thanks," I said firmly. "I can handle my own expenses." Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Jason raised an eyebrow at Megan, who suddenly became very interested in buttering her roll. As the main course was served, Mom's famous pot roast with vegetables from her garden, the small talk grew increasingly strained. Dad asked about my investments, a topic he'd never shown interest in before. Mom kept filling my wine glass and insisting I take seconds, then thirds of everything. Jason made an odd comment about how communication is important in families that seem to come out of nowhere. With each passing minute, the feeling that something wasn't right grew stronger. The air felt charged, like the heavy quiet before a thunderstorm. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen. And then, as I was reaching for the salt, it did. Dad was passing the bowl of mashed potatoes my way, his weathered hands steady as they had been when teaching me to bait a fishing hook 20 years ago. The dining room hummed with the comfortable sounds of silverware clinking against Mom's best china, the grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway. Jason had just finished telling a story about a client at work, and a momentary lull settled over the table. That's when Dad asked it, casual as commenting on the weather, but with words that would crack our family's foundation. So, Steph, he said, his voice light, but his eyes curious. Has the money been helping with your situation? Karen mentioned you might need a bit more next month. Time seemed to slow down. The bowl of potatoes hovered between us as my brain struggled to process his words. Money. What money? What situation had Mom told him about? What money? I asked, genuinely confused. The change in the room was immediate and dramatic. Dad's hand froze mid-pass, the potato bowl suspended in air. His face transformed from casual inquiry to shocked realization in seconds, eyes widening, color draining from his cheeks. He looked like someone who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click beneath his foot. I turned to Mom, whose reaction was even more telling. The glass of water she'd been lifting to her lips stopped halfway. A small tremor caused ripples across its surface. Her face, usually so composed, so ready with a deflecting smile, crumpled momentarily before she attempted to recover. But it was too late. I'd seen it. That flash of panic, guilt, and something else, fear. Karen! Dad's voice had dropped an octave, now directed at my mother with a question of his own embedded in just her name. Mom set down her water glass with exaggerated care, like it might explode if handled too roughly. Her lipstick had left a perfect red imprint on the crystal edge. She couldn't meet my eyes, or anyone's. I just meant the care package, she attempted weakly. The one I sent last month with the homemade granola and those socks you liked. The excuse was paper thin. We all knew it. Dad's furrowed brow and tight jaw made it clear he wasn't buying it either. Jason and Megan exchanged loaded glances across the table. My brother's hand moved to cover his wife's, a gesture of solidarity that only confirmed my growing suspicion that everyone at this table knew something I didn't. Mom, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. What money is Dad talking about? The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen, the tick-tock of the grandfather clock suddenly intrusive. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating our frozen tableau through the dining room curtains. It's nothing really, Mom finally said, her voice unnaturally high. She reached for the green beans, knocking over the salt shaker in her haste. Oh, clumsy me. Let's just enjoy dinner, shall we? I made your favorite chocolate cake for dessert. Dad set the potato bowl down with deliberate slowness. Karen, he said again, this time with unmistakable warning in his tone. What have you been doing? Mom's facade finally cracked completely. Her hand flew to her throat, fingers fluttering nervously at her collar. Thomas, please not now, she whispered. Yes, now. I insisted, my confusion rapidly transforming into anger. What money are you talking about? Has someone been sending me money? The tension had become unbearable. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure everyone could hear it. Dad's face had shifted from shock to something resembling profound disappointment. Jason was suddenly very interested in his pot roast, cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces. I think, Megan said softly, breaking the silence, that you all need to talk about this. Mom's chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor as she abruptly stood. I need to check on the cake, she mumbled, nearly tripping in her haste to escape to the kitchen. Mom! I called after her, but she was already gone. Dad put his head in his hands briefly before looking up at me with eyes that suddenly seemed older, wearier. Stephanie, he said quietly, I think your mother has been keeping secrets from both of us. The perfect family dinner had transformed into something unrecognizable in the span of seconds. With a single question, the carefully maintained illusion of normalcy had shattered, revealing whatever truth lay beneath. A truth that apparently everyone but Dad and I had been privy to. I pushed back from the table, my appetite completely gone. I'm going to talk to Mom, I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard Jason murmur to Dad. I told her this would happen eventually. Whatever this was, I was about to find out. I pushed through the swinging door to the kitchen to find Mom rearranging dessert plates that were already perfectly aligned. Her hands trembled so badly that the china rattled. She didn't look up when I entered, though she must have heard me. Mom, I said firmly, standing in the center of the kitchen. Look at me. She continued fussing with the plates. The cake needs another few minutes to set. I should have made it earlier, but I got distracted with it. Mom! My voice was sharper then. I intended, but it worked. She finally stopped and turned toward me, though her eyes focused somewhere over my shoulder rather than meeting mine. What money was Dad talking about? It's nothing, sweetheart. Just a misunderstanding. Her fingers pleated and unpleated the edge of her apron. Don't do that, I said, feeling my frustration mounting. Don't pretend this is nothing when clearly it's something big enough to make everyone at that table act like we're at a funeral instead of a family dinner. The kitchen door swung open again as Dad entered. His expression was grave, his usual confident posture diminished. Karen, he said quietly. Tell her. Mom's face crumpled. For a moment, I thought she might bolt from the room, but instead, she pulled out a kitchen chair and sank into it. I was just trying to help, she whispered. Dad moved to stand beside me, his presence solid yet somehow uncertain. How much have you been sending her, Karen? $2,000 a month, Mom admitted, so quietly I almost didn't hear her. Since May. The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. $2,000. Every month. I grabbed the counter for support. That's $10,000. Where would you even get that kind of money? $12,000 actually, Mom corrected, still not looking at me. I sent a little extra in July for your birthday. Dad's sharp intake of breath told me this was news to him as well. From where, Karen? We don't have that kind of disposable income. Mom's eyes finally met mine, filled with tears and something like desperate love. I sold my mother's jewelry, the antique collection we were saving for Stephanie's wedding someday, and some of the silver that was just sitting in the cabinet. Grandma's jewelry? I whispered, stunned. Those pieces were family heirlooms, passed down for generations. Mom had always spoken of them with reverence, promising they would be mine someday for my special day. You sold family heirlooms without discussing it with me. Dad's voice had taken on a dangerous quietness. I didn't think you'd understand, Mom replied, a hint of defiance entering her tone. Our daughter needed help. I didn't ask for help, I exclaimed, my shock giving way to confusion and anger. I never even knew about this money. How are you sending it? Direct deposits to your checking account, Mom said. I set it up through the bank the first of every month. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, opening my banking app. Sure enough, there they were. Monthly deposits labeled only as a credit. I had assumed they were delayed bonuses or expense reimbursements from my former employer, never bothering to investigate further because I'd been so desperate for the money. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. You're so proud, Stephanie, Mom said, wiping away a tear. You wouldn't accept help even when we offered directly. Remember when your car needed repairs last year? Or when your rent increased? You always say you're fine, that you can handle it. The kitchen door swung open again, and Jason appeared, his expression grim. She knew, by the way, he said, gesturing toward Mom, about you losing your job. She's known for months. I felt like I'd been slapped. How? Eliza told me, Mom admitted. She saw you coming out of an unemployment office when she was in Boston for that conference in May. She was worried about you. So, you've all been lying to me, pretending you didn't know I was struggling while secretly sending me money. The betrayal cut deep, made worse by the realization that my pride had created the situation. And you knew too? I asked Jason. He nodded slowly. Mom asked me not to say anything. She said it would just embarrass you. And you were okay with her selling family heirlooms? With lying to Dad? Jason had the grace to look uncomfortable. I told her it wasn't right. That's why I've been helping her with some of the money for the past 2 months. Dad's head snapped up. You've been giving your mother money to send to Stephanie? Someone had to. Jason retorted, after Mom ran out of things to sell. She was talking about taking out a loan against the house. A loan against the... Dad couldn't even finish the sentence. He sank into a chair opposite Mom, looking utterly defeated. Karen, how could you make these decisions without me? You would have said no, Mom replied simply. And Stephanie needed help. You don't know that I would have said no. Dad argued, his voice rising. You didn't give me the chance to say anything, because you don't tell me. Like you didn't tell me about the business problems. Mom shot back unexpectedly. Dad went very still. What are you talking about? The second mortgage you took out on the house last year, the credit card bills. Did you think I wouldn't notice? I watched in astonishment as my parents stared at each other like strangers. Jason leaned against the door frame, looking unsurprised by this new revelation. The business had a temporary cash flow issue, Dad said stiffly. It's resolved now. See? Mom threw up her hands. This is why I didn't tell you about helping Stephanie. You don't tell me when there are problems either. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My seemingly solid, stable family was built on quicksand. We were all keeping secrets, all pretending, all afraid to be vulnerable with each other. I checked my account every day, I said quietly, drawing everyone's attention back to me. I saw those deposits. I thought they were from work. I never even questioned it because I needed that money so badly. Tears welled in my eyes. Do you know what that's like? To be so desperate that when money mysteriously appears in your account, you don't even question it because you're just relieved you can pay rent that month. Mom stood and tried to approach me, but I backed away. Why didn't you just ask me? I demanded. Why the secrecy? Would you have taken it if you knew it came from selling my mother's jewelry? Mom asked gently. The truth was I wouldn't have. My pride would have prevented it, even as I struggled to keep my electricity on. That wasn't your decision to make, I said finally. You took away my choice. I'm your mother, she replied, as if that explained everything. I couldn't watch you suffer. So instead you lied. You all lied. I looked around at my family. Mom with her desperate need to help. Dad with his business troubles he'd hidden. Jason with his complicity in the deception. We're supposed to be a family. We are a family, Dad said wearily. A family with serious communication problems, apparently. The chocolate cake Mom had been so worried about sat forgotten on the counter. Its perfect frosting a mockery of our imperfect family. As we stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our secrets, I realized we had reached a turning point. What happened next would either break us apart completely or force us to rebuild something more honest from the ruins. We migrated back to the dining room in silent agreement, the forgotten dinner growing cold on our plates. The air felt heavy with unspoken words and shattered pretenses. I sat down slowly, feeling like I'd aged years in the span of minutes. I think, Dad said, breaking the oppressive silence, his voice raw from talking more openly in the past hour than he probably had in years, that it's time we all put our cards on the table. No more secrets. Jason cleared his throat. While we're being honest, I have something to say too. He glanced at Megan, who nodded encouragingly. I've resented how Mom always seems to make excuses for Stephanie. It's always been that way. When she decided to move to Boston instead of joining the family business, when she misses family events for work, and now the secret money. I've worked alongside Dad for years building this company, staying close to home, doing everything right according to the Wilson family playbook. And still, somehow Stephanie gets the special treatment. That's not true. Mom protested weakly. It is true. Jason insisted. You sold Grandma's jewelry for her. Jewelry that's been in the family for generations. Meanwhile, when Megan and I needed help with the down payment on our house, you gave us a loan with a repayment schedule and interest. I stared at my brother, genuinely surprised. I never asked for special treatment. You didn't have to, he replied bitterly. You were always Mom's favorite. Jason, Mom exclaimed. It's okay, Karen. Dad interjected, his voice tired. If we're clearing the air, let's really clear it. He turned to Jason. Your mother has always worried more about Stephanie because she saw herself in her, independent, determined to make it on her own. And you've always been more like me, practical, rooted in family and tradition. So, you're saying you play favorites too? Jason challenged. Dad sighed heavily. I'm saying we're human. We connected differently with each of you. That doesn't mean we love one more than the other. I tried to process this revelation while simultaneously dealing with the knowledge that my mother had been secretly supporting me for months. I still don't understand why there was so much secrecy. Why couldn't we just talk to each other? Because that's not what Wilsons do, Dad said with unexpected bitterness. We don't discuss problems. We fix them quietly and move on. Or pretend to fix them, Mom added quietly. Dad looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Mom's hands twisted in her lap. It means there are things we haven't talked about for years, Thomas. Important things. Like what? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Like the fact that your father and I have been sleeping in separate bedrooms for the past year, Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. The revelation hit like a physical blow. My parents, who I'd always seen as a united front, a team, separated under the same roof. Why? I managed to ask. Because your mother keeps making unilateral decisions without consulting me, Dad said, frustration evident in his voice. Like selling family heirlooms or sending thousands of dollars to you behind my back. And because your father works constantly and hasn't really seen me in years, Mom countered, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. He's physically present, but mentally always at the construction site. I work to provide for this family. Dad's fist came down on the table, making the dishes jump. We don't need provisions, Thomas. We need you. Mom's voice broke on the last word. Megan, who had been silent throughout most of this, gently placed her hand on the table. I think what we're seeing here is a pattern, she said softly. Everyone in this family is afraid to admit when they need help or when something's wrong. We all looked at her, this relative outsider who somehow saw our dysfunction more clearly than we did. Stephanie wouldn't admit she lost her job, Megan continued. Karen couldn't directly offer help, so she sent money secretly. Thomas had business troubles. Jason resented Stephanie, but never said anything directly. You're all so afraid of appearing vulnerable that you've created this web of secrets instead. Her words hung in the air, uncomfortable, but undeniably true. I didn't tell anyone about losing my job because I was ashamed, I admitted, my voice small. I thought I was supposed to be the successful one, proving that leaving home was the right choice. And I didn't tell you I knew, because I was afraid you'd push me away completely if I offered help directly, Mom said. You've always been so independent. Even as a little girl, you never wanted help tying your shoes or zipping your coat. I didn't tell anyone about the business difficulties, because I'm supposed to be the provider. The rock, Dad added quietly. The business is what gives this family security. And I never said anything about feeling second best because complaining seemed ungrateful when we have so much, Jason concluded. We sat in silence, the weight of these admissions settling over us. Generations of poor communication patterns were suddenly laid bare. The toxic legacy of well-intentioned silence. My parents were the same way, Mom finally said. My father lost his job when I was 12, but they pretended everything was fine for months. We kept going to restaurants and buying new clothes while they secretly sold their possessions and drained their savings. When we finally lost the house, it came as a complete shock to me. I promised myself I'd never let my children experience that kind of sudden devastation. So instead, you created a different kind of deception. I observed, not unkindly. I thought I was protecting you, she whispered. My father was the same, Dad added unexpectedly. Never talked about problems, just handled them. When he got sick, he hid it from everyone until he literally collapsed at work. By then, the cancer had spread too far to treat effectively. The pieces were falling into place. Our family's dysfunction hadn't started with us. It was inherited, passed down like an heirloom, more enduring than Grandma's jewelry. So what do we do now? Jason asked, the anger in his voice replaced by something more vulnerable. How do we break the cycle? We start by telling the truth, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. The whole truth, no matter how uncomfortable. I took a deep breath. I've been having debilitating migraines for months from the stress. Sometimes I can't get out of bed for days. The medication costs a fortune without insurance, but without it, I can't function enough to job hunt effectively. My business partner wants to buy me out, Dad confessed. The company isn't doing well. Hasn't been for years. I've been working 70-hour weeks, trying to keep it afloat. I've been thinking about going back to teaching, Mom said. I love you all, but I need something that's just mine. I feel invisible sometimes. Megan and I have been in couples therapy for 6 months, Jason admitted. The baby wasn't planned, and we've been struggling to adjust to the idea. One by one, we unloaded our burdens, our fears, our secret struggles. With each confession, the air seemed to clear a little more, making room for something new to grow in the space between us. Something honest, and though painful, ultimately healthier than the comfortable lies we've been living with. As our revelations gradually exhausted themselves, a strange calm settled over the dining room. The fancy china Mom had set out remained largely untouched, the food cold and forgotten. None of us had much appetite anymore. "I think we should move to the living room," Dad suggested, his voice uncharacteristically soft from talking more openly in the past hour than he probably had in years. More comfortable there. We migrated silently, each lost in our own thoughts. The familiar living room with its worn leather sofa and the recliner where Dad had read bedtime stories when we were small felt like neutral territory after the battlefield of the dining table. I curled up in the corner of the sofa, suddenly exhausted. Mom sat nearby, but left space between us, respecting the invisible barrier my hurt had erected. Dad took his usual recliner while Jason and Megan settled on the love seat. "I don't know whether to be angry or grateful," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Part of me is furious that you went behind my back, that you all knew I was struggling and pretended not to know. But another part recognizes that without that money, I might be homeless right now." Mom's hands twisted in her lap. "I never meant to betray your trust, Stephanie. I couldn't bear knowing you were in trouble and doing nothing. But you took away my agency," I said. "My right to make my own choices, even if those choices were bad ones." "You're right," she acknowledged. And I saw how difficult that admission was for her. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from the pain of seeing you struggle." Dad leaned forward in his chair. "I think we all need to acknowledge that our intentions, however good, created this mess. Your mother shouldn't have sent money behind everyone's backs, but Stephanie, you shouldn't have hidden your job loss either." "I know," I admitted. "Pride is expensive. What happens now?" Jason asked the question we were all thinking. "Do we just go back to pretending after this?" "No," Dad said firmly. "We can't unring this bell. And honestly, I don't want to." "Neither do I," Mom agreed. "As painful as this is, it feels like finally lancing a wound that's been festering for years." I considered the metaphor and found it apparent. The exposure hurt terribly, but perhaps it was the only way to begin healing. "I think we need some ground rules going forward," I suggested. "New family agreements." "Like what?" Jason asked. "Like honesty," I said, "real honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. If I'm struggling, I'll tell you. But in return, I need you all to respect my independence, offer help directly, and accept my answer even if it's no." "That seems fair," Dad nodded. "And I need to know that help doesn't come with strings attached," I continued. "Not from any of you." "The money was never about controlling you," Mom protested. "Maybe not consciously," I acknowledged. "But there's a power dynamic in secret giving. You knew something I didn't. You were influencing my life without my knowledge or consent." Mom was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I can see that now." "I have a suggestion," Megan offered. "Jason and I have found our therapy really helpful. Maybe family counseling would give you all a safe space to continue these conversations with some guidance." Dad's immediate frown told me what he thought of that idea, but to my surprise, he didn't dismiss it outright. "Maybe," he said reluctantly. "I'm not big on talking to strangers about family business, but clearly we haven't been handling things well on our own." "I'd be willing to try it," Mom said, sounding relieved at the suggestion. "Me too," I agreed. "But in the meantime, I want to talk about the money." Everyone tensed again. "I'll pay it back," I said firmly. "Every penny, once I'm working again." "Absolutely not," Mom insisted. "It was a gift. A gift I didn't know I was receiving," I pointed out. "Besides, that money came from family heirlooms that should have stayed in the family." "The jewelry was meant for you eventually anyway," Mom said. "Not like this," I insisted. "Not sold off piece by piece in secret." "What if we compromise?" Dad suggested. "Stephanie, when you're back on your feet, you don't repay the money directly. Instead, you start a savings account for your own future children, or to replace the heirloom someday." The suggestion resonated. It wasn't about the money itself, but what it represented. Family legacy, support, continuity. "I could do that," I agreed quietly. "And in the meantime," Jason said, surprisingly, "if you need help while job hunting, I might be able to offer you some contract work for the company just until you find something permanent. No special treatment, regular pay for regular work. I looked at my brother, seeing a genuine olive branch in his offer. I'd appreciate that. And I'll be direct about what we can and can't afford to help with, Mom promised. No more secret support. If you're really in trouble, Dad added, we want to know. Not so we can fix it for you, but so we can support you while you fix it yourself. The conversation continued as evening turned to night. We talked about boundaries and expectations, about communication styles and triggers. We made plans for weekly family calls where everyone would share one challenge they were facing, no matter how small. Dad reluctantly agreed to try 3 sessions of family therapy before deciding whether to continue. As exhaustion began to overtake us, Megan, now visibly tired from the emotional marathon, asked the question that had been hovering unspoken. So what about tomorrow and the next day? How do we make sure we don't slip back into old patterns? One day at a time, Mom said simply. New habits don't form overnight. And we hold each other accountable, I added gently but firmly. As Jason and Megan prepared to leave, my brother pulled me aside. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for resenting you all these years. I should have just talked to you. And I'm sorry for not seeing how my choices affected you, I replied. We've both been stuck in our own narratives. We hugged awkwardly, rusty at showing physical affection to each other, but it was a start. As I prepared to leave as well, Mom handed me a small package. Open it when you get home, she said. Back in my tiny studio apartment, I unwrapped the package to find a small silver locket, one of Grandma's pieces that hadn't been sold. Inside was a tiny photo of our family from years ago, all smiling on a summer vacation. Tucked into the box was a note in Mom's handwriting. Some treasures can't be sold. Love, Mom. I closed the locket gently, tears welling in my eyes. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, it felt like we were all finally walking it together in the light, rather than in shadow. 3 months have passed since that explosive family dinner. It's remarkable how a single question, has the money helped, could unravel decades of family dynamics in minutes. Sometimes I wonder if Dad's slip was entirely accidental, or if some part of him wanted the truth to finally come out. We haven't discussed that possibility, but I've caught him looking more relaxed these days, as if unburdened. The changes in our family haven't been dramatic or instantaneous. They've come in small moments, in hesitant conversations, in the conscious choice to speak truth, even when silence would be easier. We established weekly family video calls that we've maintained faithfully. The first few were awkward. None of us quite knew how to navigate our new commitment to honesty without the buffer of our usual polite evasions, but gradually we've developed a rhythm. Each person shares one challenge they're facing, no matter how small. No fixing, just listening and supporting. Last week, Dad admitted he was struggling with the idea of selling his business. For the first time, I saw him vulnerable without shame, asking for perspectives rather than presenting decisions already made. Mom shared her fear of returning to teaching after so many years away. Jason talked about feeling overwhelmed by impending fatherhood, and I confessed my anxiety about an upcoming job interview, my first serious prospect since the layoff. That's been another significant change. 2 weeks after our family meltdown, I received an unexpected call from one of Dad's business associates who needed someone with financial expertise for a growing tech company in Burlington. I was suspicious at first, another secret intervention, but Dad swore he hadn't orchestrated it. Sometimes the universe has its own timing. I moved back to Vermont last month, not to my parents' house, but to a modest apartment 15 minutes away. The job pays less than my Boston position, but the cost of living is dramatically lower, and I'm no longer spending money to maintain appearances I can't afford. My migraines have decreased significantly with a reduction in stress. Mom and I have been rebuilding our relationship slowly. We meet for coffee weekly, just the 2 of us. At first, we stuck to safe topics, but gradually, we've begun discussing deeper issues. Her concerns about her marriage, my fears about starting over professionally. She's returned to teaching part-time at the community college, something she's wanted to do for years, but never pursued because of her self-assigned role as family caretaker. I defined myself by what I did for everyone else, she told me during one of our coffee dates. I forgot who I was outside of being your mother and Thomas's wife. And I was so determined to be different from you that I didn't recognize when I was making the same mistakes. Just in reverse, I admitted. I tried so hard to be completely independent that I isolated myself. The family therapy sessions, Dad reluctantly agreed to have been surprisingly productive. Dr. Winters, our therapist, identified patterns none of us had recognized. How Dad's need for control and Mom's need to nurture had created a dynamic where honest communication felt dangerous. How Jason and I had internalized those patterns in different ways. Your family operates on unspoken rules, she observed in our third session. The primary one being, problems should be solved privately, not discussed openly. That might work for simple issues, but for complex emotional matters, it's disastrous. Dad, to his credit, has been trying. After our fifth session, he pulled me aside. This talking business isn't natural for me, he admitted gruffly. But I'm beginning to see the damage my silence has done. The biggest surprise has been my evolving relationship with Jason. Without the undercurrent of competition and resentment, we've discovered we actually enjoy each other's company. He's been teaching me about the construction business on weekends, and I've been helping him modernize their accounting systems. I always thought you looked down on the family business, he confessed one Saturday as we toured a worksite. And I always thought you resented me for leaving, I replied. I did, he admitted. But not because you left, because you seemed to do it so easily, like staying close to family was somehow less valuable than making it on your own. It wasn't easy, I told him. I was terrified, but I needed to prove something to myself. And did you? He asked. I considered the question. Yes and no. I proved I could survive on my own, but I also learned that independence isn't the same as isolation. Connection isn't weakness. As for the money Mom secretly sent me, we reached a resolution. I didn't pay it back directly, but I've started a special savings account. Part will eventually go toward replacing some of the heirloom jewelry when possible. The rest will be for future family needs, not just my own potential children someday, but a resource for anyone in our family who needs support. Think of it as the Wilson Family Transparency Fund, Jason joked when I explained the concept. Mom's revelation about her own childhood financial trauma has helped me understand her actions better, even if I still don't agree with how she handled things. She grew up with secrets and sudden devastation. So, she created more secrets trying to prevent the same for her children. It's a painful reminder that unhealed wounds often become the wounds we inflict on others, even with the best intentions. Dad and Mom are working on their marriage. They've started seeing a couples therapist in addition to our family sessions. Dad moved back into their bedroom last month, a quiet milestone no one directly mentioned, but everyone noticed. They've even started taking ballroom dancing lessons on Thursday nights, something Mom always wanted to try and Dad always avoided. It's about learning to move together, Mom explained when I expressed surprise at Dad's participation. To communicate without words. For a man of few words, it seems like the perfect metaphor. The most profound lesson I've taken from all of this is the difference between enabling and supporting. Real support respects autonomy and dignity. It comes with honest communication, not secret machinations. It's offering a hand while allowing the other person to decide whether to take it. Mom's secret financial help came from love, but it was enabling rather than truly supportive because it reinforced patterns of dishonesty and pride. True support would have been creating a family environment where I felt safe admitting my struggles without fear of judgment or loss of independence. That's what we're building now. Slowly, imperfectly, but with intention. Last Sunday at our most recent family dinner, now a genuine monthly tradition rather than an obligation, we used Mom's fancy china again. But this time it wasn't to maintain appearances or pretend perfection. It was a conscious choice to celebrate how far we've come, to honor both our history and our new beginning. As we passed dishes around the table, Dad paused, his fork hovering over his plate. I'm proud of us, he said simply. From a man who once communicated primarily in grunts and nods, it was practically a sonnet. The road to genuine family healing is longer than 3 months. Of course, we still stumble. Old patterns emerge under stress. Just last week, I caught myself downplaying a financial concern during our family call. The familiar urge to appear self-sufficient rising automatically. But the difference now is that I recognized it, took a breath, and then told the truth. And my family listened, without trying to fix it, without judgment, offering support without demanding control. Truth, it turns out, is like any other muscle. It strengthens with use. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Or found yourself caught in patterns of communication handed down through generations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our family struggles is the first step toward healing. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family dynamics, healing, and growth. And remember, it's never too late to start building something honest from the ruins of what was broken. Thank you for listening to my story. May your own families find paths to truthful connection, even when that path leads through difficult terrain.